looking towards Aberdeen Road. And this shows the existing single unit dwelling on Aberdeen Road with the rest of the proposed property just to the right there and then tucked a little bit behind. So the application is to construct a 35-unit residential development on these lots. The intent is to construct a 34-unit building while maintaining the existing single-unit residential dwelling. The new building would be 4 stories in height, but due to the topography would look kind of like 3 stories along most of Aberdeen Road. And it's proposed to be composed of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. The property is zoned as urban commercial in the land use bylaw, and the property is designated as general commercial in the future land use map of the municipal planning strategy. A designation is what council envisions for the property in the future, so the C3 zone does fall in with the current designation, so it's supported in what council envisions for these properties. And the surrounding zoning is urban commercial, LaHave commercial, institutional, single unit residential, and high density residential. And the surrounding uses are single unit dwellings, multi-unit residential dwellings, offices, and some commercial, including restaurant and retail. So this is the proposed site plan of the property. It includes the new building, which is in the dark gray, and the existing dwelling, which is up to the top left in white. The development agreement would state that a total of 35 units are permitted as a collective development on a single lot. So it wouldn't stipulate that it has to be comprised of a 34-unit building and a single unit dwelling. So there'd be no requirement to maintain the existing building, but they are proposing that with the building shape that they've proposed there that you can see on the site plan. So the new building would front on Hurdle Drive, just along the bottom there. And due to the layout of the building, as you can see, a lot would kind of be tucked behind the single unit residential and be set back a bit more off of Aberdeen Road. They are proposing 6 parking spaces on site and above ground. Right down there, that would be the vehicular entrance. So it's set back a little bit from Aberdeen Road, and there's proposed underground parking as well, with the same entrance to that parking lot. The front entrance of the building would also be off of Hurdle Drive. And there would be outdoor amenity space and landscaped podiums in 3 areas. So back here, here, and here. And buffering would be required near the property lines along the back and along the right there where the building at 18 Hurdle is currently being constructed. So this is a rendering of the proposed building as would be seen from Hurdle Drive. You can see there's a distinct main entrance, balconies, the entrance to the parking lot, and the underground parking right there. And you can see that the ground floor is where the parking is located, but it's also the lobby at the front. And this is a rendering of the proposed building from the corner of Hurdle Drive and Aberdeen Road. So you can see a bit of a bump out there on the corner. And due to the topography, like I said, it's kind of similar to a 3-story building as you move further back. And you can also see there where the building cuts in and steps back further. So this is one of the elevation drawings showing what the building would look like from Hurdle Drive. It would be approximately 40 feet in height, and the elevation drawings would be included in the development agreement. So the height, massing, and exterior design would be in substantive accordance with what you see here and the other elevation drawings. This is another one that's the side of the building facing Aberdeen Road, so you can see that section on the left that is closer to the street and the section that would be set back. So the land use bylaw requires a set amount of parking for all developments, and but because it's a development agreement, it's not doesn't have to be strictly adhered to. It can be used as a guideline. The land use bylaw requires 45 vehicular parking spaces, and the applicant is proposing 43, with 2 of those being accessible. The development agreement would be written to specifically only require a minimum of 40 in case they had any trouble meeting or getting the proposed 43, but the accessible parking spots would still be required. The land use bylaw also requires 18 bicycle parking spaces, and that's what the applicant is proposing. They're proposing to have it located inside the parking garage, and if it isn't, they would have to follow the land use bylaw requirements. A traffic study has been conducted and reviewed by the engineering department, or started to be reviewed. There's some more information that is required, and final review would be completed prior to the issuance of permits rather than through this development agreement process, since the development agreement is focused on the property itself rather than the surrounding area. The traffic study did provide some information on trip generation estimates. So the development is expected to generate approximately 190 vehicle trips on a typical weekday. And this would be composed of 95 vehicles entering and 95 vehicles exiting. And of the total weekday trips, 13 of those are expected during the morning peak hours and 15 in the afternoon peak hours. And broken down, this would mean approximately 5 to 7 vehicles on McNeil Drive and 6 to 10 on Aberdeen Road during those peak hours. The consultant also took into consideration the building that's being developed at 18 Hurdle Drive. And so with the addition of those trip estimates, it would mean approximately 14 to 16 vehicles on McNeil Drive and 17 to 20 on Aberdeen Road during peak hours of the day. The land use bylaw requires amenity space for multi-unit residential developments in this zone. And the required space from the land use bylaw is about 7,600 square feet, and the applicant is proposing just over 8,400 square feet, so that amount would be specified in the development agreement. And the amenity space would have to be made up of balconies, landscape podiums, outdoor amenity space, and a minimum of a 700 square foot common room that's inside the building. And as I mentioned, buffering would be required between the development and the adjacent properties, as I showed on the site plan. And the buffer that would be adjacent to 18 Hurdle Drive would be written specifically in the development agreement that it would need to obstruct views below 12 feet and during all seasons because the first floor of both buildings are around the same level, so to add some privacy. And a landscaping plan would be required prior to issuing any development permits and would be approved by the development officer. And there'd be a bit of a focus on the interaction with the corner of Aberdeen and Hurdle since it is on a corner lot. The land use bylaw doesn't require affordable housing units in any developments, but for certain developments, a developer may increase the density by 20% if 50% of the additional units are affordable. So a 20% addition to the permitted density in this zone is 6 units. And so 50% of those 6 units would have to be affordable. So 3 would have to be affordable in this development to get that bonus. And without the bonus, this zone permits a density of 30 units per acre, which in terms of this property is 29 units because the property is just slightly under 1 acre. So with that bonus density, that would bring the total to 35 units. And it's up to the developer to work with a third-party housing organization to create an agreement to support this. So in summary, since I kind of went over a few of the things, the following would be included in the development agreement: the permitted use and number of units, the site plan and elevation drawings, information about parking, amenity space, buffers, and affordable units. Additionally, there would be information about wastewater offsetting and stormwater management. This application was actually received just before the wastewater betterment charges were passed, so they have the option to either complete a study and contribute based on that study, or they could follow the bylaw. And they completed a study and intend to contribute based on that, but the development agreement would state that if they didn't want to do that, they would have to follow the wastewater betterment charges. And a stormwater management plan would have to be submitted and be to the satisfaction of the town engineer prior to any permits. A public participation meeting was held on October 7th. A notification was provided to properties within 100 feet of the property. An ad was posted in the South Shore Breaker. 5 members of the public attended, and 1 email was received. And the main discussion topics of that meeting were general traffic on Hurdle Drive and Aberdeen Road based on this development, but also just in general, as well as the desire for affordable housing. So staff always review the town's policy while analyzing developments and creating development agreements. So the current zone, the C3 zone, is meant to accommodate commercial, mixed use, and multi-unit residential development, which contribute to a more compact urban character. And the municipal planning strategy encourages a mix of land uses, compact development, and a range of housing options. The MPS contains policy statements specific to development agreements, which focus on compatibility of use, compatibility of the building, landscaping, infrastructure, accessible by emergency services, active transportation and parking, and environmental impacts. And so for this development, the land use is compatible with those adjacent to it because of the surrounding residential units, both single and multi-unit, as well as a mix of offices and commercial. It's also close to the downtown area. The building would be nearly the same height, scale, and bulk as the adjacent building being constructed at 18 Hurdle Drive. And a landscaping plan, as I mentioned, would be required prior to permit issuance. Like I said, the wastewater offsetting would have to be provided and service drawings required before permit issuance as well. And the traffic study would need to be approved prior to permit issuance as well. The MPS contains general policy statements, and the ones that related to this development were to provide vehicular and bicycle parking, design and locate parking in accordance with the requirements, and require landscaping to enhance the area and reduce conflict. Residential policies that were analyzed that were applicable to this development were focused on minimizing conflicts between land uses, supporting a full range of housing options and styles, providing density increase when providing affordable housing, integrating active transportation, requiring amenity space, and promoting residential densification. Relevant commercial policies encourage compact urban form and infill development in areas of town, including areas around the downtown. Policy CDA 8 specifically relates to multi-unit residential development in certain zones, including this C3 zone. So there was a bit more specifics, and this policy is supported because the development would front on a corner of an arterial and a local street. And although the front entrance of the building would be on the local street, there is interaction with Aberdeen Road with the inclusion of balconies and the landscaping that I mentioned to articulate the corner. The building would be more than 2 stories. The building would have an architecturally distinct base and top, as well as architectural features that articulate the corner, and the minimum amenity space would also be met with this building. So it is recommended that Council give first consideration to the development agreement for 102 and 108 Aberdeen Road and 14 Hurdle Drive, and to schedule a public hearing on December 13th.
Thank you. Questions from members of Council? Deputy Mayor Tanner.
Mackenzie, just a quick clarification. So there is a commitment for affordable housing?
Yeah, they would be committing 3 units.
3, okay.
Yeah.
And do we know the size of those units?
No.
Okay.
No. So they're providing a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, but they didn't explicitly say which ones they would be doing affordable.
And would we need that information, or does that not factor into it?
It doesn't, yeah, we don't, the land use bylaw doesn't really regulate the amount of bedrooms in different units, and so we just require affordable housing in general, but it doesn't specifically say a certain type of unit, so that would be through an agreement with the third party housing organizer or organization.
Yep.
Do we have any, and do we have any influence with the third, as a town, do we have any influence with the third party, or like a suggestion to be made that we would like to see this be?
Like based on need, we need family versus...
I hear, exactly, I
Right.
hear family needs.
I guess it's a conversation we could have, but it's not anything we could explicitly state in the development agreement.
Yeah, okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Certainly, I think it's a discussion worth having as we move forward in this and start finding where our involvement would be, especially when we look at bonus density. I think there's an opportunity to say, hey, 3 of the units have to be affordable in this example, but we'd maybe allow you to do a little bit more if we knew that you were going to do some more family affordable units. You know what I mean? Because there's such a need for 2 and 3 bedroom affordable units. That I think there's an opportunity for us to play a role of, for lack of a better term, bonus density. If you aim to the target that we really need to, we have every demographic needs affordable housing, but where we're really falling short, I think, from tip to tip of the province is in that family affordable housing. So don't lose sight of that. 100%. Other questions from Council? Councillor Thorburn.
Just one. We was talking open spaces, and it's on the docket tonight, and we was talking about taking cash instead of the amenity space that's being talked about here, the 8,400 square feet. Would that still be an option, or just take the space? Because we got Generations After Park just up there a little bit. This is another little piece of land in itself. Would we be better off having the cash?
Yeah, so for this, it's a bit different. So that's through subdivision.
Yeah.
And so since this is actually a consolidation of lots and through a development agreement, it's not part of that, so that's a separate one. So with this, it's just amenity space in general that's required, whether it's outdoor or indoor. So yeah, a bit different.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask?
Yes.
I'm curious why they're keeping the house. Do we know, or do we care?
No, they didn't really specifically say it. I think they were just interested in it. It's a great kind of heritage property, so we were happy to hear that. I think they didn't have any reason to not also have that as just a place to rent.
Okay.
Councillor Caldwell.
Could you just expand on the public input we received?
Yeah. Anything in particular, or?
I'm just wondering, there were concerns about traffic. It's just simply
Mhm.
the volume of traffic straightforward, or?
Yeah, so it was kind of similar, actually, input that we had from when the 18 Hurdle development was happening as well. Just folks living on Hurdle Drive specifically, just worry about the amount of traffic that goes down their road and any shortcutting that might happen going up to Glen Allen. Those talking about the traffic on Aberdeen, I think we're a little bit less concerned about what this actual development would add, just in general the amount of traffic and the infrastructure that exists on Aberdeen Road. So there was kind of two parts to it. And then there was some discussion about, not actually that much, but about if there was any potential to remove the turning restrictions on Aberdeen and Hurdle, because again, they just don't want to kind of permit any shortcutting up in that area. But in general, I think they just experienced higher traffic than they were expecting. Overall, it didn't seem like they were too worried about the traffic coming from this development specifically. But although the people on Hurdle Drive did want to know where the traffic pattern would flow.
I'm assuming that this development has no impact on any potential future widening of Aberdeen if that were ever to take place.
Right, so, go back to the site plan. So there is, you'll see, this is the property line, and the town owns this strip. So although there's like, I think it's like 18 to 25 feet of a setback from the property line in that area, it's actually further away from the road itself because of the portion that the town owns.
Okay.
So there's that space there.
Perfect, thank you. Other questions? Council? Someone prepared to make a motion? Councilor Conklin?
I move that council for the town of Bridgewater give first consideration to the development agreement as contained in Appendix A of document 21-101A for 102 and 108 Aberdeen Road and 14 Hurdle Drive, and schedule a public hearing during the regularly scheduled council meeting on December 13th, 2021 at 6 p.m. in council chambers at Town Hall.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Fagier. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Our next item, 6.2, application for development agreement and notice of public participation meeting for 25 Queen Street.
That's also me.
Perfect. Thank you.
So an application was received by Black Bay Real Estate Group for a development agreement to develop 2 9-unit residential buildings at 25 Queen Street. So there'd be a total of 19 units within the 2 buildings. The subject property is located in the downtown residential zone and is currently a vacant lot. It's the site of the old Fairview Inn, so it's kind of midway through the center of Queen Street between Phoenix and Dominion. Both buildings would be 3 stories and include 9 units made up of a mix of, or they're proposing a mix of 8 2-bedroom units and 1 1-bedroom unit. So for this development agreement, in order to achieve 9 units on the properties, 6 units would be permitted per lot by development agreement, and then an additional 3 units would be permitted per lot from the affordable housing bonus. So they would again have to do 50% of the additional units as affordable housing if they wanted to have the full amount of units. And the building design and detailing intends to reflect the neighboring four square style houses along Queen Street in that area. And the proposal requires a thorough review by engineering and community development staff against the criteria of policy IM6, which includes a review of transportation, infrastructure, and compatibility, as well as other policies. And a public participation meeting is scheduled to be held at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, November 24th here in council chambers.
Any questions from members of council on that? So it'll be that again for the public meeting here on the 24th. So it'll be interesting to get public feedback on that. Anyone? Councilor Cole?
Is there, excuse me, is there a way we can ensure that we maintain those mature trees that are on the property?
We are talking to the developer about that, actually. They intend to, so the intention is that we will be able to include that in the development agreement in some capacity. I don't know exactly how that would be worded, but we've thought about that as well. They're really beautiful, so we want to try and, if they're interested in keeping them, then including that in the development agreement in some way.
And just one more question. I think I've heard concerns about the underground infrastructure in that area.
Mhm.
We're confident we can accommodate this development?
So it hasn't been analyzed yet, so that's currently happening. There was issues with a larger development that was proposed on that lot before. This is less units, so that's currently being looked at by the engineering department to see if the infrastructure is supported.
That's a good question. Are there questions or comments from council? So, all right, November 24th, then we'll get some information when that's done. Thank you very much. Down to 6.3, which is Open Space Plan 2021. And council received this last week, and it was, I thought it was incredibly informative. So this is coming back for some discussion and direction from council.
Okay, so hello everyone, thanks for having me back. So tonight I'm going to go through the open space plan with a specific emphasis on the action items. And then once I've wrapped up, Nick Brown will come down and we'll field some questions if you have any. So yeah, just back to the introduction. So the purpose of this plan is established in the Section 18 of the Municipal Planning Strategy, and the purpose and the intent is to look at the quality of existing open spaces, planned growth, integration and connectivity, and planning for climate change. The vision was established by Council in 2017 and has remained the same. So our network of open spaces provides inviting places for people to gather, be physically active, find locally grown food, and connect with nature. Our community is connected by welcoming sidewalks, trails, streets, bridges, and the Lady River, making it easy for people of all ages and abilities to move about. Our beautiful open spaces attract visitors and contribute to the health of the Lady River watershed. The principles for this plan are for all ages and abilities, to be environmentally focused, culturally supportive, healthy, and representative. The objectives are to identify gaps in the open space network, identify barriers to open space use and promote inclusivity, to establish a framework for prioritizing open space investment, to identify opportunities to improve physical connection between open spaces to promote active transportation choices, to identify opportunities to improve social connection and access to nature, to influence decisions for enhanced ecosystem health, to identify opportunities to improve access to food grown in open spaces, to identify opportunities to raise awareness and increase use of open spaces, and to foster partnerships to build capacity. Now we do a brief community profile. So open space creation kind of began with Dean Wild donating Brookside Cemetery in 1902 and has continued throughout the years, most recently with Vision Wesco Park in 2017. The Bridgewater population is roughly around 8,800 in 2019, and the median age of the population has steadily risen since 2006, and the bulk of Bridgewater residents choose driving as their main mode of transportation. Also, as part of this plan, a community engagement process was undertaken. This began with a 6-hour meeting between staff, the community, the Open Space Network Advisory Committee, and the community. And then it also included chalkboard pop-ups, postcard questionnaires, James Walk, a youth walk, and an online survey, among other things. And so what this really highlighted was our main engagement themes being looking at vibrant places, plant life and nature, and small and convenient spaces. We found some attention areas that people really wanted to look at, so looking at the Centennial Trail, Small World Learning Center, downtown Bridgewater, Glen Allen Park, Kinsman Athletic Park, and Woodland Gardens. And then also the active transportation plan conducted an engagement process, and this kind of links in with getting us to these spaces and places. So this process highlighted that there is a lack of defined space for walking, wheeling, and cycling, that active transportation connections are not convenient or easy to navigate. There's a lack of sidewalk connections to parks and schools. There's a desire for lighting to be added along the trail system. There's a lack of bicycle parking and a lack of interesting destinations to walk, bike, and roll to. Then building off of those 3 stages, we conducted an open space inventory, so looking at all the open spaces around town. And they fall within these 3 categories: green spaces, trails, and parks. And then within those three categories, we looked at creating new classifications for these spaces so that when we plan and improve these spaces moving forward, we can better, more equitably distribute their amenities. So within those categories, green spaces have greenways, natural spaces, linear spaces, trails, neighborhood trails, regional trails, connector trails, and parks. We have micro parks all the way up to the bigger regional parks, and then inclusive of playground, urban plazas, cultural parks, and athletic parks. And then using that, so then here we see all those classifications on a key map, just showing them across Bridgewater. And then we took those classifications and conducted a service area spatial analysis. So this is a service area for the playgrounds, neighborhood parks, community parks across Bridgewater. We looked at 5, 10, and 15-minute walking distances. So the yellow areas are the areas, parks, the areas that are best served by these spaces, and the red areas are the least served, or the most poorly served. We also divided the town up into 5, and we used a figure ground map, so this shows the outline of the dwelling units, so you can better see the density of those places affected. So in those red areas, there's quite a few homes, quite a few households that are at kind of the edge of that 15-minute walk time boundary. And then we looked at the sum of children in these areas to kind of contextualize the composition that is being affected. We also did an analysis service area for the regional athletic parks, looking at the drive times, so 5, 10, and 15-minute drive times as well. And these are for the spaces that kind of people typically drive to and spend longer at during the day, to soccer, football, etc. And just to kind of provide a larger context for the region and who we're servicing. We also looked at complementary plans and programs to kind of complement the plan itself. These plans include the Outdoor Transportation Plan, which kind of connects us to these spaces and places. Rec 2.0, which is looking at encouraging and facilitating unstructured play. The Municipal Climate Change Action Plan, looking at conservation. Town Infrastructure Master Plan, looking at how we interact with service upgrades and our open spaces, and then our municipal planning strategy and our bylaws. Now into the actions. So first is the Parks Improvement Plan, and this is meant to be a 10-year operational program guide for developing and improving new and existing open spaces. We intend for it to use a priority ranking system that references the open space classifications. And we're be reviewed annually by staff to include new projects, directions, and to reflect our priority change. And so then the recommendation here is for Town Council to direct staff to amend Municipal Planning Strategy Section 11, Open Space, to include policy enabling the above-mentioned Parks Improvement Plan. And the preliminary policy is as follows. It shall be policy of Council to maintain the practice of reviewing the Parks Improvement Plan on an annual basis and to ensure that reference is made to the open space classifications with the open space plan to inform said annual review. Second, we have the Playground Enhancement Program. So this is an asset management tool that will be linked to an open space reserve endowed via surplus operational park budgets. Council will deliberate the park budgets year to year, and surpluses will be spent where the Parks and Playground Improvement Program directs, and also in accordance with the Parks Improvement Plan. This is all done to equitably distribute new playgrounds across Bridgewater. And so the recommendation here is to direct staff to create the Playground Enhancement Program and to also direct staff to set up the accompanying open space reserve for future operational or capital projects. The third is the MPS and Bylaw recommendations. So this is broken down by document. First, looking at the municipal planning strategy, we are looking at 3 policy areas: OS3, OS3A, and OS7. So first, we're looking at flipping policy to give the town of Bridgewater authority to decide what type of land transfer we want to receive from subdividers. So this comes in the form of land, cash in lieu, or a combination of both. The second point is to increase parkland dedication transfer requirement from 5% to 10%. So when we're deciding what we're getting there in the first point, how much we're getting. And then 3, develop and employ a land assembly strategy to more aggressively acquire land which abuts the Lehigh River. So the recommendation here is to direct staff to amend these policies to give the town authority to decide what type of land transfer they will receive and to increase the land transfer requirement from 5 to 10%. We should also direct staff to update Map 7, Open Space Network, make general amendments to the open space section respecting the proposed space classifications, and to acquire land more aggressively along the Lehigh River. Looking at the subdivision bylaw, the first 2 points are the concurrent amendments from those municipal planning strategy points. So moving into the third one, we're looking at adding walkways and trails and stormwater management to the usability criteria. So when parkland is dedicated, there's criteria that governs what can be delivered to the town. And then looking at 4, so we want to identify and sell underutilized land dedicated through the parkland dedication process. So the recommendation here is to direct staff to amend the subdivision bylaw pursuant to the concurrent MPS amendments found in section 6.3.1, and for town council to direct staff to review the usable land definition to include circumstances that further reflect council's intention to promote connectivity as well as planning for climate change. Town council should also direct staff to identify underutilized land dedicated for open space for resale. Moving into the town property bylaw, so section 10 limits access to public parks between the hours of 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. Several open spaces are also closed to public during the winter. This is at odds with the town's desire to create and promote open spaces for all. So the recommendation is to direct staff to amend the town property bylaw to reflect the desire to create and promote open spaces as inclusive and accessible during more reasonable hours in all seasons. Into the vending bylaw, so this regulates when, where, and how people sell goods and services in open spaces. Analysis has found that vending should be permitted in more spaces, and community feedback has shown the current fee structure might limit open space use for recreational purposes. The associated recommendation here is to direct staff to review the town of Bridgewater vending bylaw for the purpose of lowering barriers to open space usage for businesses and their patrons in conjunction with the timeline and prioritization included herein. Number 4 is the placemaking plan. So placemaking is important for bringing health, happiness, and vibrancy into everyday life. This could be prioritized through staff work planning and through the development of a formal placemaking plan. This would make it easier for the town to facilitate and support community-led placemaking initiatives. This is, for example, mural projects, bench painting initiatives, art installations. And so the recommendation here is to direct staff to develop a placemaking plan in conjunction with the timeline and prioritization included herein. Town council should also direct staff in the community development and engineering departments to include placemaking and work planning, including work to identify budgetary impacts. Local stakeholders should also be supported in community-led placemaking initiatives. Number 5 is the land assembly strategy. So this is typically led by a development entity. It could be the town, developer, crown corporation, etc. This assembles land parcels to create a consolidated, more desirable sites. This could be used to achieve strategic town goals, such as economic development and environmental conservation. The associated recommendation here is to direct staff to develop a strategic acquisitions and land assembly plan that considers strategy for economic development, parkland, and conservation. Town council should also direct staff to approach the provincial government about acquiring the Hay River Trail and Riverview Park. Additionally, as part of the forthcoming planning document review, town council should direct staff to create an environmental management policy that considers the acquisition of lands within flood risk areas identified on map 6 in accordance with the MCCAP. Number 6, integrated active transportation and trail maintenance program. So this is a program to extend active transportation access in the Bridgewater robust trail system. This would be through a policy addition to the MPS. It would ensure the trails are properly maintained, including winter maintenance, and that upgrades are conducted when needed. Spatial analysis would also be used to explore opportunities to expand the network. And the recommendation here is to direct staff to include new MPS policy that establishes an integrated active transportation and trail maintenance program. This program would bring about greater trail access and community-wide connectivity via year-round maintenance and timely upgrades. Number 7 is the street tree management plan. So 2019, the town was presented with a street tree report. This included 7 recommendations for managing Bridgewater street trees, including the creation of a street tree management plan. This is to include to update the existing street tree inventory, identify replacement trees and planting best practices, identify community engagement opportunities, define updated guidelines, and it would establish monitoring processes for pest and invasive species. The recommendation here is to create the street tree management plan. Number 8 is looking at Explore Bridgewater and open space promotion planning. So this is an interactive web portal that promotes Bridgewater's open space, recreational, active transportation, and transit amenities. And there's also an associated trail guide that promotes trails and open spaces. So we'd be looking here to continue monitoring the functionality of these programs as well as other opportunities to promote open spaces. And the recommendation being to conduct a biannual review of the Explore Bridgewater and current open space promotion planning to ensure that the town's open spaces are effectively promoted to residents and visitors. Additionally, it is recommended the Town Council direct staff to explore new opportunities to grow town's open spaces. Number 9, Generations Active Park Concept Plan Implementation, looking at Phase 1, the site servicing. So when complete, Generations Active Park will be one of the most significant park developments in the region and will likely facilitate a broad range of activities. However, for this site to live up to its potential, it will require servicing, which must be completed before these amenities can be installed. So this is really to prepare the site for future development. The recommendation here is to direct staff to develop and implement a site servicing plan for Generations Active Park in conjunction with the timeline of prioritization. And additionally, the Town Council should direct staff to amend MPS Policy OS5 to reflect the recently endorsed conceptual plan for Generations Active Park. 10, looking at future recreation amenities. So in the past, residents have come to council with various many proposals: beach volleyball, tennis courts, pickleball, etc. And considering these requests, the town should include a recreation amenity audit. This would determine how well the current distribution of amenities serves residents and what new spaces should include. Findings also should be used to inform an in-depth needs assessment and recommendations report. And then the recommendation here is to direct staff to undertake a recreation amenity audit to determine how well the current distribution of recreation amenities serves residents and whether Bridgewater has grown to meet the community's evolving recreation needs. Lastly, we have the Corporate Identity Guidelines and Signage Program. So this was established in 2018. It's a corporate-wide commitment to professional communications and branding, and it's also important for developing and maintaining wayfinding. So to further promote open space use, recreation, and healthy living in Bridgewater, the town should continue to add wayfinding to open spaces across Bridgewater to promote and encourage their usage. The recommendation here then is to direct staff to include open space wayfinding and work planning as opportunities arise. And then that brings us into implementation. So just briefly, for these actions, they will follow a time frame. So looking at short, medium, long-term, and ongoing. 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and 10 to 15 years, so kind of a 15-year time horizon, and then they're prioritized high, medium, and low. And then the plan itself will be monitored by the open space plan action items completed and ongoing, the land and cash received via that parkland dedication process, the number of new open spaces added or created, the number of improvement projects completed, the number of residents living within a 5-minute walk of a playground or a park, and the number of natural spaces added. Moving on to the next steps, we're looking at some discussion, revision, possibly, council consideration, and hopefully enforcement. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you. It's a lot. You probably need a glass of water.
Yeah.
I don't have any issues with the recommendations, but I just wanted, we talked about this in the discussion session last week. So the vending bylaw, I know that the recommendation is to look at kind of removing or reducing those barriers for business to use those open spaces. But I want to make sure that we balance that with not using the taxpayer's facility to advantage a business compared to a commercial tax-paying business. So I'd rather see, maybe it will be part of this, that the funds received from businesses that are using open spaces would perhaps go back into reducing the barriers for those not-for-profits or youth sports that are using other facilities like the ball fields or the football field or the baseball diamonds, where we now charge them a fee. Do you know what I mean? So if I just use a fitness studio, one that's renting a space on King Street and one that's using our park, if we make it too cheap for people to use that for their business in the park, then we are directly disadvantaging a commercial taxpayer. And I know it's not apples to apples, but we got to make sure it's not like this. And maybe that recommendation captures that as part of the review. didn't want to lose sight of those not-for-profits or that youth aspect.
Right, yes, and the recommendation here is for staff to investigate how to remove barriers, so the fee structure is just part of that. Considering, knowing that when the fees were put into place, there was this consideration of the brick and mortar versus the vendors who are, in stands or in food trucks and are only there for a period of time in our public places. So to create that level playing field, that's where the fees were derived from originally. So we would be very careful when looking at whether to reduce the fees. That is one part of the larger picture of hoping to remove barriers to allow for vending in other public places than what's permitted now, and just looking at the bylaw to see how we can streamline that process to permit those vendors in public places. So it's one piece of the puzzle. Completely understand your statement, your position. That would be part of the process to look at that and to come back to council on that matter.
Thanks for answering that. Other questions from council on this? Councilor Colwell here.
At our discussion session, we talked about a recommendation for a surplus, using surplus funds for playgrounds, and we also just, I think there was we had some talk about actually budgeting the playgrounds rather than
budgeting to a
relying
surplus.
on surpluses.
Budgeting for reserve allocation. Yeah.
And from staff's perspective, that's a better route to take. To create a line item budget, that was heard at the discussion session. Staff didn't make those changes in advance of this council meeting, so it could be discussed again. But that is a revision that we will need to make.
Yeah, I think we had consensus around the table that the risk is if you budget to assuming that there's going to be surpluses. If there aren't any, then it gives us or future councils the excuse for why playgrounds weren't enhanced because we never had a surplus. When the report clearly indicates we have neighborhoods that are lacking in playgrounds, and so we should have a line item. So just making sure, Councillor Caldwell's point, making sure that we capture that and don't lose sight of that.
Yes.
Councillor Bridgewater.
Just a comment. I was glad to see the tree report from 2018 mentioned, and that will focus on continuing with tree management and looking at our different species, because I think trees are valuable, and as it shows in the report, that we continue to to have that focus when we look at our own parks and our own green spaces.
Other comments? So I know go ahead.
Okay. Can you put table 3 up, Eric? Yeah. So I was just going to mention that at the discussion session, council did talk about the Generations Active Park gap. And so what this table does here is it kind of gives you a priority in terms of when things will get done in 5-year increments. So I would suspect that if council endorses this plan, when we do our strategic priority setting exercise, we'll have to determine 1 to 5 years is a pretty long time. So what are we going to do each year? But you did talk about Generations Active Park and indicated that that may be something that you want to see happen sooner than the 10 to 15 year time frame, understanding that there's a financial requirement that goes along with that. And it was discussed that we would put Allison on the task of finding funding for phase 1 for site servicing for Generations Active Park, and budget so that if we do get the funding, we would do it. So we can, we may end up looking at having to change that timeline if this becomes a document that council endorses to move that up a bit, with the caveat that it's subject to having the funding, not 100%, but enough to offset some of the town's costs to do that development.
So I understand strategic planning this is a living thing that's going to change based on strategic planning, but I have a question about if the motion eventually is to endorse the open space plan, how do we address some of the comments that we've made in terms of not losing sight of changes, budgeting to a surplus?
Yeah, so we can revise the document to reference that, because that was a recommendation, so we can change that recommendation and have it come back to council for final approval based on some of the feedback that we get tonight. So Nick and Eric can work on that revision and any other change that council may want to have considered before the final document comes forward, because it kind of will be the playbook or guide to what we'll do and when it comes to open space. Now, each particular thing, like a parks improvement plan and the policy and bylaw amendments, you endorse the document, we bring back the detail on those, and you'll approve those at that time. By endorsing the document, you're saying, yes, we want staff to explore and work on these and bring back those pieces one by one to council for approval.
Okay, that makes sense. Councillor Cole.
To prevent repetition, the notable things we discussed at the discussion session would be noted in the revisions?
If council wishes to have that made, you can give that direction tonight to make those revisions, and then we can bring that back at the November, December meeting for council's final approval of the document. And we have noted what some of those concerns were. Just trying to find my
So we had
notes
quite a
here.
lengthy discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of them were pretty, I
Yeah.
think council felt quite strongly on some of those. So again,
Yeah.
not to pick on the park surplus, but making sure that we're not relying on a surplus that may or may not happen, or budgeting to the assumption of a surplus. So that was one.
We talked about, and there was some discussion about the playground locations and where priorities may be, and not just looking at the 15-minute walk, but looking at density as well. So, so there may be some areas that don't have a lot of residents, and some that do.
And commercial activities.
And, yeah, and commercial
Yeah.
activities. So, the document can be revised to reflect those comments. Now, the public open space, the policy and bylaw amendments, again, staff would work on those amendments with the discussion paper and bring that back to council for consideration. But the recommendation is that we look at making amendments to change it from 5% land or cash in lieu to 10%, and specify where it is in the town that we will take land and where it is we'll take cash only. So there was some concern about going from 5 to 10. Again, you can accept that in principle, but you will be approving amendments at some point in time, so you'll have your say then as well, with respects to whether or not you want it to be 5 or 10. And then, as I say, it was land reserved for buying lands was something that was suggested as well, that perhaps we can incorporate some words within the document about the land assembly piece. And I believe it was the deputy mayor mentioned that, like with the PSC, we have a reserve account that we put funds in to buy lands. And we did talk about when we sell lands, that's to go into a reserve account, but it's in our general capital reserve, so we will kind of see if we can trace it back a bit. But I think our director of finance felt it was way back last time we get open space. But we can look at setting up a reserve and consider that at budget time as well for land assembly. And then it was just generations after park and looking at moving that up, subject to getting some funding.
I feel like there were enough changes in here that we need it to come back before it gets endorsed. Deputy Mayor, Jeff.
Just a question on the unused dedicated parkland. What criteria, I guess, do you use to then pull the trigger to say, let's put some equipment in there or make use of that?
Well, it'd be subject to annual budget deliberations. That's where the parks improvement plans really come into play. So to have this 10-year now that's more so an operational guide. From the capital perspective, the playground enhancement program would identify where there are gaps in the system. So that could factor into really figuring out where these new parks should be located. But really it comes down to the spatial analysis that we've done and will continue to do including the density and where people work, not only live, and mapping that out and using GIS, Geographic Information Systems, to identify those gaps. It's pretty clear, and just from what we've done thus far, where those gaps exist in our network. So, there are some lands that have, on a preliminary level, been deemed maybe surplus, lands that we've previously received through parkland dedication, and those would be, we would only want to go forward with a recommendation to declare those surplus if there's other lands in that area that take up the requirement or provide the amenity that we need in that area.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a number of factors that play a part.
Councilor Caldwell.
I would like to commend staff for what I thought was a really excellent, thorough report and great plan for us going forward. And I think because it was so thorough, it's inevitable that we'd want to make some revisions because there's a lot in it. But I just want to clarify the issue around the parkland dedication and the recommendation to increase that percentage from 5 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
We can actually, even if it's in this document, we can clarify the exact amount we want at a later date.
That's correct. And I mean, we have a 1 to 5 year time frame on that. So that could be, if it's year 5, it could be a different council, for example, right? So that document is just setting out that you'll consider that.
Okay.
You have to go through a formal process with first reading, public hearing, second reading to do something like that. So there's public consultation and input required before you would make a final decision. So it'd be hard to tie your hands to that in this document.
Other questions or comments? So I'm sensing that we'd like to have some of these revisions incorporated and have it come back. So do you need a motion for that, or will they just be incorporated?
You can just motion to direct staff to make the revisions discussed and to bring it back at a future meeting for final approval.
Would someone like to make that motion? Sure. Councilor Thorburn, seconded by Councilor Caldwell. Everyone understands the motion? Okay. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Councilor Caldwell, because it was such a detailed plan, it versus it was vague, we'd just be like, oh, it's probably captured in there. So I do appreciate the detail and the presentation, and so thank you for that. I always feel bad when I feel like you must think you've done all this work and now you want us to change it again, but it's a good thing. Going down to reports and recommendation, records management policy, document 21-148.
So this is just notice that at the next council meeting in November 22nd, it's proposed that council give consideration to repealing their existing records management policy and approving a new records management policy number 80, and that policy pertains to the management, retention, and destruction of documents for the town of Bridgewater. So council can reserve hearing the presentation till that meeting, or I'm more than willing to give it to you tonight as well.
You mean we could get it twice?
You could.
Yeah.
We'll be back. I was stuck on you saying policy. It's the record management's policy.
Yes.
So, disappointed the motion's not going to say that. Someone prepared to make the motion, Ms. Councilor Bergier.
Yes, I'll make the motion, Your Worship. That Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater give notice pursuant to Section 48 of the Municipal Government Act that at the November 22nd, 2021 council meeting, consideration will be given to repealing the existing Policy 80, Records Management, and approving a new Policy 80, Records Management, retention and destruction of documents as contained in Document 21-148.
Seconded by Councilor Thorburn. Any discussion? So again, this is coming back to our next meeting for more detail. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. I should have mentioned at the top of the meeting, this is this is the 1-year anniversary since this council began. It was a year ago that you were sworn into the council, and I know you're thinking this is a lot more fun than I thought it would be, but where else are you going to get policy? So, moving on, alternative procurement for Energize Bridgewater. I see our Director of Community Development is here to walk us through this one.
Thank you. So, as you know, we've been struggling to fill our IT systems integration specialist role. So it became vacant last December, and we've held 3 different competitions. And the short answer is COVID, and the long, complicated answer is also COVID when it comes to the struggles we've had to fill that role. But the Energy Information Management System, or Energy Management Information System, rather, EMIS, which is our core piece of data and connected technology component to the Energize Bridgewater project, really requires that IT expertise. And so as we were struggling to figure out how to do yet another call to fill this role, someone within our local network here identified that there was somebody in our community who has this type of expertise. And so we had an initial exploratory conversation with this gentleman, and he had recently joined a international firm called Axion Labs to provide this type of advisory service. So we are requesting that we have alternative procurement. Sorry, just getting to the wrong spot here, up to a maximum of $50,000 in total expenditures over the next 6 months till the end of this fiscal year to bring on this data and connected technology consultant and advisory services from Axion Labs to support the Energize Bridgewater project. So, alternative procurement is only allowed through our purchasing policy under specific circumstances. And we've identified this as really an unforeseeable situation of urgency at this point. We have tried multiple different ways. And one of the other challenges is that ultimately the work that we want to do, if we were to put out an RFP, there are multiple companies around that could do this work, but they would also want to bid on the end product. And if they were to provide advisory services to build any type of request for proposals, they would be completely excluded from bidding on you can't build the RFP and bid on the same one. So our hands have been tied as to who we could go to, because there are lots of companies in the area that could do this type of work for us, but they would want to actually do the work. And so we had some people say, no, we can't talk to you about that because we want to see that RFP. So the work that this particular person, who is local to our community, they'd be helping us to assess our existing concept plan against the current technological environment, because almost 2 years has passed since our application was submitted, and we've been working on our concept, but technology is changing all the time, so we just need a final assessment, determine components of the RFP, assist us with vendor list and selection criteria, and assisting with evaluating the RFPs that come in. And that's the big heavy work, of which is fully funded through the Smart Cities Challenge funding, as well as the ACOA funding that we have for this particular piece. So there's no budget pressure associated with this. And in fact, I believe we might be getting a community rate, which is great.
Wonderful.
Any questions?
Questions from council?
Just one thing to add to that, the urgency piece is in that we have milestone reporting
Yes.
obligations with Infrastructure Canada as part of our Smart Cities application. And we do have a milestone that I believe it's March 2022. And that is all around the EMIS, the Energy Management Information System. And we're stuck at getting an RFP done that can go to market. And without having those expertise or skills, this is what we want that person to do, is to, as Jessica said, make sure that it's real, that what we're asking for can be done, and then that it's at the point that we would actually get someone to bid on it and we get a good product. So without having that, we don't have time to go out to market. and get that and still meet that milestone, because it's about a 3-month process to do an RFP and evaluate that. And then we wouldn't have the EMIS RFP done and out and award it before March, and that would be concerned, because that delays the whole project, which we already asked for a year's extension on.
Everyone understands the request. Any questions? Is someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Caldwell?
I move that council for the town of Bridgewater delegate authority to the chief administrative officer to use alternative procurement practices up to a maximum of $50,000 in total expenditures within the next 6 months until March 31st, 2022 for data and connected technology consultant and advisory services from Axiom Labs or similar software engineering firm to support the Energized Bridgewater project.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Conklin. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. We're down to our last item, 9.4, which is our added item, the consulting services for development of a funding and investment system for local energy projects.
So this one is relatively straightforward. We went out to a proposal call for the consulting services for the development of a funding and investment system for local energy projects, which is one of the components within our Energized Bridgewater Smart Cities application that is a key component of how this is going to work. It's going to fund fund the program as we go forward. And we received 2 RFPs with respects to this proposal call. We had an evaluation committee, and as you can see, it was a two envelope process. So one was first criteria only without seeing price, and then if they got the minimum score in terms of the quality of the response to criteria, which is qualifications, reference, that they understand the scope, methodology, and the approach that we were looking for. If they got the minimum bid there, which I believe was 56 points or 70%, then we would open the envelope and look at the price. And then there was a factor for that as well. Of the 2 proponents, the minimum bid for quality was not met in terms of the criteria that we evaluated. One was missing parts of their proposal, so we weren't able to fully evaluate it. And we're not able to accept anything after it's closed. So we had to kind of take it for what it was and try to evaluate that. And the other one didn't have what we were looking for in terms of the community investment systems, like the CDIVs and those types of systems. We didn't feel that experience was there that we were looking for within the proposal. Lots of for-profit type financial modeling and that type of thing, but none of the community side of things. So from that, there was not the minimum score required to open the price envelopes. So the recommendation is that council close this and not award. We will refine the RFP to ensure that it is clear that we do, although it was stated in the proposal, we can make it clear that we're looking for that community investment model, which is part of what this program was built on, is having those types of models, because it's not a for-profit investment system that we're looking at, because those would go to the shareholders. This is more about being able to fund the program. So it's a little bit of a different model. So we'll make that clearer, perhaps, and take the opportunity to talk to the proponents to determine if there's any way that we can improve the RFP before we go back out to market. But we can't go back out to market until council makes a decision with respects to this RFP. And as I indicated, the recommendation is that that council not award RFP 2021-09.
Questions from council?
For motion.
Yes, please.
I move the council for the town of Bridgewater direct staff not to award RFP 2021-09 consulting services for the development of a funding and investment system for local energy projects to any of the proponents from whom a proposal was received.
Seconded by Councillor Thorburn. Discussion?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Can I just ask a question?
Mhm.
The criteria,
Mhm.
5 points for cover letter, 5 points for
Mhm.
executive summary. Like, is that,
Standard?
yeah, like it just
Yeah.
seems like, not that I
Usually-
don't care if they have a cover letter or what it contains, but I'd rather the weight be on, like, what are you gonna do? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like a resume. If I got a resume, it's a great resume, it doesn't have a cover letter, I really don't care.
The executive summary, the cover letter, you could probably argue that, but the executive summary was one where they were specifically asked to put in their own words and summarize what it is we wanted them to do. Because often what you'll see is cut and paste.
Right.
This is what scope of work will say you must, and then it defines it, and then that's just plopped in. So the executive summary was there to ensure that they could actually put in their own words what it is they were going to do and summarize it. So that was, because I had the same question when I saw the criteria, but then Leon was quick to tell me the importance of why.
That actually makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
then. So I retract my statement on the executive summary, maybe not so much the cover letter, but, okay. That concludes our regular scheduled council meeting. We have a couple of in-camera items, one, both under obviously the Municipal Government Act, one for contract negotiations and one for personnel matters. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Councilor Frazier, seconded by Councilor Thorburn. We are adjourned. Thank you.